Hello and welcome to another episode of New World Report. I'm your host, Arthur. Now, today we're going to be looking into Saudi Arabian funding of extremism across the world. It came to light with a report coming out about Saudi Arabia's funding in the UK. Now, this one is from The Guardian. It says, report calls for public inquiry into Gulf funding of British extremism. Now, what's funny is people don't want to really put it out because, as it says here, it says, report by Henry Jackson Society also calls for the government to consider requiring UK religious institutions, including mosques, to be required to reveal sources of overseas funding. Now, should have been done a long time ago, right? Everybody should reveal where their funding is coming from for most public things. That's where I think everybody should be. The findings come as Theresa May faces pressure to publish the government's own report into foreign funding of terrorism. Yeah, people don't want to report it. I don't understand what's going on. It says MPs nervous of upsetting strategic relations in the Gulf have also decided not to publish a separate foreign office strategy paper on the region. Now that's ridiculous. Nervous. So they're not going to publish it because they're nervous from petrodollars. Now, it says Saudi Arabia has since the 1960s sponsored a multi-million-dollar effort to export Wahhabi Islam across the Islamic world, including to Muslim communities in the West. Yeah, now that's what we're going to talk about. In the UK, it's not just the UK, right? It's a lot of different countries. It's a lot of mosques that are sponsoring extremists in Belgium, which are spreading around the EU, France, we've been hearing a lot about. Now it says, it claims in 2007, Saudi Arabia was estimated to spend at least 2 billion or 1.5 billion euros or around $2 billion annually on promoting Wahhabism worldwide. By 2015, this figure has believed doubled. Now, it says the impact of this increased spending may have been felt in Britain. In 2007, estimates put the number of mosques in Britain adhering to Salafism and Wahhabism, which is the bad, the one that is spreading hatred. We're going to get into it at 68. There were 68 mosques in Britain in 2007 that were preaching this hateful form of Islam. And then 7 years later, in 2015, the British mosques identified with Wahhabism had risen to 111, almost doubled. Now, this is not good, people. It's not just in Britain, it's everywhere. Now, let's get into this a little bit more, and you realize that there's a lot more. This first started in the 60s. It was against Nasserism in Egypt, in order to push back against Nasserism in Egypt. Saudi Arabia started funding these, and then exploded in the 80s against the Iranian Revolution's influence. They really wanted to be when Iran came out as the Islamic Republic of Iran, they wanted to be leaders of the Islamic world, and then Saudis didn't want to have that, so they pushed back with funding all this kind of extremist ideology, this Wahhabist ideology that is very entwined with the Saudi regime, as we'll maybe get into a little bit. And what's interesting is that the U.S. has looked the other way in the war with Afghanistan and the insurgency in Chechnya. They use this Islamization of the population in Afghanistan, in Chechnya, in order to push some of their ideals. Mostly against Russia. In the early in the 80s, in the invasion of Afghanistan by Russia. Now, the fountainhead of Islamic extremism that promotes and legitimizes such violence is the fanatical Wahhabi strain of Islam centered in Saudi Arabia. This is where it's coming from. And if the world wants to clamp down and eliminate such violent extremism, it must confront this, primary host. Saudi Arabia is the facilitator, right? Now, we're going to go into this. It says, Saudi Arabia's 6 decades long campaign to expand hardline Wahhabism Islam has led to support for mosques and Islamic institutions that appear to have links to extremism. Yeah, the distribution of hardline and illiberal texts has been another way that Wahhabism has been promoted to Britain's Muslim community. It has pretty much helped all this foreign funded Islamic extremism in the UK, right? In the 1990s, some literature was distributed directly from the Saudi embassy in London, particularly Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab's key text Kitab al-Tawheed. This was a text that is believed to have been a key factor in the radicalization of several of Britain's Salafist preachers at the time, who Abdul Wahhab is the one of the, you could say, one of the founders of Saudi Arabia. Yes, it's not in the royal family, but the clerics of this ideology cooperate very closely with the Saudi government. It's very entwined. It was a deal made back in the day where the Saudis would legitimize themselves and require loyalty from the Wahhabists, and in return they would spread this ideology, and that's what we've seen. This, according to this Pew Research study, as an example of it was a research study in 2011. This reports that as an example of Saudi Wahhabi influence in different countries around the world, the teachings on Muslim culture and is particularly and literally visible in parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. We're talking mainly in like Pakistan and India, and we're going to talk about India a little bit and Pakistan a little bit later. More women cover their hair, you can see that, you know what I mean? And more men have grown beards. We can expect more people to have joined extremist groups and support violent acts of extremism around the world too, right? This report shows that 82% of Muslims polled in Egypt and Pakistan, 70% in Jordan, and 56% in Nigeria support the stoning of people who commit adultery. Now that's very, sad. It's very alarming. 82% of Muslims polled in Pakistan, 77% of Muslims in Egypt, 65% of Muslims in Nigeria, and 58% in Jordan support whipping and cutting off the hands for crimes like theft and robbery. Now these countries, Pakistan, Egypt, Nigeria, Jordan, especially Pakistan, and there's a lot of this funding in Nigeria and Pakistan, a lot in Pakistan, especially since this last regime came to power in a coup. I'm not going to get into this right now. It says that 86% of Muslims polled in Jordan, 84% in Egypt, and 76% in Pakistan support the death penalty for those who leave the Muslim religion. Now that's, kill them if they're not Muslim. What if they accidentally, what if they're a Western person or like a young college student that goes over there and thinks it's cool to be a Muslim, how they become Buddhist or something, and all of a sudden they're Muslim and then they want to, come out of there. Are they going to get killed? What's going on? So, more than 80% of Muslims, between 60 and 80, let's say, right? I know I read a lot of numbers here. I should have had that one. I should have written these down for you guys to show it. It's in this poll, right? It's in this Pew poll. Between 60 to 80% of people in Pakistan, Egypt, and Nigeria and Jordan have supported stoning people who commit adultery, whipping and cutting off hands of crimes like theft and robbery, and support for the death penalty for those who leave the Muslim religion. Now, this is not even counting Saudi Arabia. This is what the Saudis have done in these countries. Now, this is growing in the West. That's what the UK is worried about. This wasn't what it used to be. I mean, look, this is Afghanistan before, in the 1970s. Does this look like, what we know Afghanistan as right now? This one looks pretty hot right here. Look at that one. This is what they used to be, and then after funding, they funded the Taliban. They funded these schools. They built these Islamic Wahhabist schools, and pretty much made these countries into Saudi Arabia. This is what we see right now, right? And Saudi Arabian women are pretty much like this, except they show their eyes. These guys have a little thing. It's a little bit more extreme version because the Taliban were a little bit more harsh than the Saudis were because they were new to power. Look at this one. Can you even find the woman? Look, between all the little burqas, beekeeper suits. Can you find the woman here? There's a giant hand. There she is. There's a giant hand here. This one This other picture shows what it is. She's probably works here, maybe like a younger sister of this guy, and they're selling these all the same colored little beekeeper suit burqas. Anyway, all these countries weren't like this, and this is where we are right now, you know. Now, according to some people or some officials in the, US, and as we've seen in the EU, because the UK guys were afraid or nervous about publishing reports, they say that, quote, the Saudis are valuable, quote, valuable partners against terrorism. Now that's, laughable if you know anything about what's going on. They say that the Saudis are assisting to fight against Al Qaeda and the Islamic State. Now, if you know anything about what's going on over there, if you've been following, you realize that Saudi Arabia has only been focusing on Yemen and focusing on destroying Bashar al-Assad, not taking down any ISIS or any kind of Al Qaeda besides in its own territory, because it doesn't want to. This ideology that they spread also bites back, but it's a kind of thing that they gamble, they think they can control it, but this will get out of hand, people. I'm going to go into this report published by the Henry Jackson Society that the UK is talking about. It's right here. So it says here, over the past 30 years, Saudi Arabia has spent at least 67 pounds. Now here's 67 billion pounds. Here, let's put 67 pounds in here. That's 86, almost $90 billion. $90 billion in the past 30 years to, spread Wahhabist Islam globally. Now, this is a very hate-filled Islam branch of Islam, Wahhabism. Bin Laden, all the 9/11 hijackers, ISIS, Al Qaeda, they are all a branch of this kind of Islam. Now, it says the most profound impact has been in other parts of the Islamic world, where funding from Gulf states has been used to promote a more extreme interpretation of Islam, during often overriding local practices and traditions. This is what happened in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as we see, right? The WikiLeaks cables revealed during the first term of Obama administration, the U.S. Department was not only concerned about how funds from the countries such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar were reaching the West, but also about how funding from these countries was funding its way to countries such as Pakistan for the purpose of supporting clerics preaching a particular hardline version of Islam. India's own intelligence reports had reported that between 9/11 and 2013, that's just 2 years, Saudi Arabia spent $250 million just in India alone, as well as supporting thousands of clerics in India for the purpose of establishing Wahhabist mosques and seminars. At the international level, this is a phenomenon that has arguably influenced the character and the tone of religious practice and belief in Sunni Muslim societies from Africa to Indonesia. You see this? This is getting out of hand. It's been getting out of hand. It says Saudi Arabia is estimated to spend $2 billion annually. Now let's compare that to a little bit of Cold War history, where the Russians spent, all in all, there are different estimates, we don't know exactly, but in the 30 years they spent less than 30 billion. Now the Saudis have spent 90 billion on this, and growing, and there are quote unquote allies. This is a very dangerous thing that is happening, folks. So it says that look at this one, it says institutions in the UK that receive Saudi funding are also run directly from Saudi Arabia. That is the case with Wahhabi and also WAMY, and also reported the King Fahd Mosque in Edinburgh. Now, talking about King Fahd, now of course this is going on everywhere, guys. This is just one report about Britain. Imagine what's going on in the US. Imagine what's going on in every other country that, one estimate is that during the reign of King Fahd, 75 billion was spent, and that's from 82 to 2005. Now, $75 billion was spent. That more than 25 billion has been spent from 2005 until now. The money was used to establish 200 Islamic colleges, 210 Islamic centers, 1,500 mosques, 2,000 schools for Muslim children in non-Muslim majority countries. This is money that brought Wahhabist power through the Arab world and financed networks of fundamentalist schools from Sudan to northern Pakistan, guys. 70 embassies around the world added religious attaches to these attaches' job was to get new mosques built in these countries that they were in, and to persuade these existing mosques to propagate the dawah, Wahhabiyah, which means propagating this, pretty much the embassy was there to promote this kind of Islamic fundamentalism. Now, like I said, the Soviet budget to supporting communism all around the world was under 30 billion. The Saudi Arabian government funds a number of international organizations, and some of these people that are connected to these organizations are very famous. Like, look at this, is Prince Turki Al Faisal. Everybody knows him. He loves to be in the West. This is the famous guy. You can see him in the Arabian garb and in the Western garb. Here is a interview by him and this CBS lady. You see, he's loved over here. He's telling us what to do in Syria. The Saudi Arabian government funds a number of international organizations to spend fundamentalist Islam, including the Muslim World League, the World Assembly of Muslim Youth, international relief organizations, and different committees for assisting the Palestinian Mujahideen, which they just blame Iran for doing. Of course, Iran is also funding some Shiite groups, but we're talking about Saudi Arabia here because this is what we're worried about in terms of terrorism. We haven't had a Shiite group, hit Western targets yet. Now, supporting this, like what we said, that these embassies, they support the dawah. This guy is that Saudi prince, and he's been named for having connections to people who have been extremists. Now, I'll get into that a little bit. Supporting this kind of religious ideology around the world is kind of they can't not do it. The Saudi government kind of has to do it. Like I said, it has to do with how they began in the beginning of their country. I might make a video about this later, but this supporting this kind of dawah, which literally means invitation to Islam, this kind of Wahhabist image invitation, is you have to preach this kind of Islam. It is a religious requirement for Saudi rulers, and they cannot be abandoned without losing their domestic legitimacy, quote unquote, as protectors and propagators of Islam. This is all quotes. This is what their mission statement is. U.S. diplomatic cables released by WikiLeaks in 2010 contained numerous complaints of funding of U.S. extremists by Saudis and other Gulf Arabs. According to a 2009 U.S. State Department communication by then United States Secretary Hillary Clinton, guys, we know her, donors in Saudi Arabia continued the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Now we're talking about Qatar. They try to blame Qatar. They always talk about Qatar, and they've thrown that out. Qatar is the funder of terrorism. But here we have Hillary Clinton in the WikiLeaks report saying that Saudi Arabia is the most significant source of funding to terrorism. Now, they support groups such as Al-Qaeda and the Afghan Taliban. In this report, it says Saudi Arabia, quote, remains a critical financial support base. Let me get out of this. Saudi prints on helping U.S. fight ISIS. You see, this is the con, guys. This is the joke. This is the sad, evil joke that's going on. As they fund it, they fight it while they funding it. So they set the fire, and they're the fire brigade. This is the sad part about this. See, part of this funding comes from the zakat, charitable donations, which is kind of like a tithe. This is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, which is paid by all Saudis and encouraged by them to be paid, and it amounts to at least 2.5% of their income. This is in Saudi Arabia, of course. And it is alleged that some of these charities serve as fronts for money laundering and terrorist financing operations, and further that some Saudis know full and well the terrorist purposes to which their money will be applied. See, this is talking about different ones. Qatar, it says this tiny but the main focus here is on Saudi Arabia, which is actually the most one, right? It says Saudi Arabia undermines whatever good work it does by continuing to spend billions of dollars spreading Wahhabism. So yeah, it's trying to fund it, it's trying to show that it's trying to help us, but it's really not, is it? It's ultra-conservative brand of Islam, which in turn inspires ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other Sunni extremists through a network of imams and mosques in countries like Kosovo, Indonesia, Pakistan, UK, Belgium, the US, dependent on the Wahhabi clerics for legitimacy. They're dependent on this. This goes back to, I'm going to make another video about this, how the Saudis are in power because of this Wahhabist ideology and their alliance with the clerics that, they were actually kind of a militia back then. And so they allied themselves with these Wahhabist militias, and they promised that they would spread this kind of ideology. And here we are, less than 100 years later. Depending on the Wahhabist clerics for legitimacy, the royal family has been slow to reform a religion that teaches the non-believers that non-believers and wayward Muslims should be shunned or fought if they reject its strict message. This means anybody else who's not a Wahhabist Muslim, even any other kind of Muslim, let alone Christians and Jews and Buddhists and everyone else, must be rejected and fought. This is coming from Saudi Arabia, guys. The Saudis, aided by American intelligence and arms, may also be creating extremists with their brutal war in Yemen. So this is kind of sad, guys. This also talks about Iran, which is funding Hezbollah and Bashar al-Assad. But again, none of this is really killing people that are not in war countries, is it? Except the Sunni branch of terrorism, apparently. In 2014, Zakaria Moussaoui, this is an Al-Qaeda member that was imprisoned in the U.S., testified under oath that the members of Saudi royal family supported Al-Qaeda. Moussaoui said that he was tasked by Osama bin Laden to creating a digital database, to catalog where the donors are coming from, different countries to Al-Qaeda. And he said that most of these were coming from Saudi Arabia, and including several members of Saudi royal family, including Prince Turki Al Faisal Al Saud. This is this guy, guys. This is let me pause this for a second. I know this is interesting. I hope it's not taking away from what I'm saying while you guys are watching. ISIS held Raqqa. This is what they're supporting. It's pretty much like Saudi Arabia. These gangs running around the city trying to make people abide by the religious law. This is exactly what's going on in Saudi Arabia. If you don't shut your store down for time for prayer, they're going to come and break some windows. This is what is going on. Now, going back to what I was saying, I shouldn't go on so many tangents. I'm sorry, guys. This guy that was caught pointed out to this dude that we just saw on video. He comes and he loves to come in the West and talk. He has personally funded Al-Qaeda from his account. Apparently, from his account, he's named several other Saudi royal members. But this is very, this comes out. This guy was the former intelligence service, Saudi Arabia's foreign intelligence service director general, and he was the ambassador to the United States. This is, very alarming. Now, the Saudi Arabian government, of course, denied all these charges, but it's not that, what surprises me is why we're letting this happen. Of course, it's not all of us, Bob Graham, this guy, of course, we love Bob Graham, Senator Bob Graham, and he's been going around trying to raise some alarms, according to the 9/11 Commission report that was reported a long time ago, back in 2001, 2000, whatever. It says that while it's possible that charities with significant, this is quote, that possible that charities with significant Saudi government censorship diverted funds to Al-Qaeda, and Saudi Arabia has long been considered the primary source of Al-Qaeda funding. We have no evidence that Saudi government, as an institution or senior Saudi officials, officials individually funded the organization. Now, this goes against what that guy had said. That, yeah, Musawi, Zacharias Musawi, right? This is the famous Zacharias Musawi that they caught. This guy has named that Saudi prince that we talked about. This dude. We know that Saudi Arabia is connected, so I don't know why the report says differently. Now, more recently, like I said, that Bob Graham, the guy that we were talking about earlier, is bringing to light that he's pointing a very strong finger at Saudi Arabia. You know, he's saying that they were the principal financiers of 9/11 hijackers. I know that's great that this is coming, but it's still not getting very much media or anything, really. He has been unusually explicit about Saudi Arabia, quote unquote, saying Saudi Arabia has not stopped its interest in spreading extreme Wahhabism. You know, this is, thank you, Bob Graham. I'm glad. But, so ISIS is a product of Saudi ideals, really. This is what Saudi Arabia wants to put everywhere. One thing is really clear, that this Saudi Wahhabi influence continues to create this ideological narrative, that helps this kind of violent extremism. If not Al-Qaeda specifically, if it's ISIS or Al-Nusra or something else. It says that U.S. scholar Farah Pandith, I have a picture of her, Secretary of Homeland Security's Homeland Security Advisory Council. That's a mouthful. Anyway, so she worked for the Bush administration, and she has said that places I visited, the Wahhabi influence was an insidious presence, changing the local sense of identity from displacing historical, cultural, vibrant forms of Islamic practice, like we saw here and here, and changing it, and pulling along individuals who were either paid to or followed their rulers, who became on their own custodians of Wahhabi worldview. She says that funding all this is Saudi money, which paid for things like the textbooks and mosques and TV stations and training of imams to turn countries like Pakistan and Afghanistan into this. Now, for the guiding principles, the Taliban and people like ISIS, Baghdadi, what was his name? Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they've openly supported Wahhabist style ideology. They're clear about their almost exclusive commitment to the Wahhabi movement of Sunni Islam. This is what ISIS propagates, this is what ISIS wants to be. The group circulates images of the schools, in the schools it controls, of Wahhabi religious texts. It says that the videos from this group's territory, from videos like I showed you here, have shown Wahhabi texts plastered on sides of official missionary vans. Missionary vans are filled with these dudes, these things, right? These are the missionary vans that go around trying to promote their ideology. According to former British intelligence officer Alistair Crook, ISIS is deeply Wahhabist. In Saudi Arabia, the ruling elite is divided over this. So now, if you guys have been following what's going on in the news, this guy is going to be the next king. There's a power grab by this one guy. He put away, there has been a divide within the Saudi family, but this new guy in power is definitely on the side of pushing for this ISIS Wahhabist texts and ideology everywhere. In Saudi Arabia itself, the ruling elite is divided. Some applaud the ISIS is fighting Iranian Shia fire with Sunni fire. This guy wants to, this Mohammed bin Salman, he wants to push for this, and this is what he's been doing. That they kind of applauded ISIS, that this was a new Sunni state that is taking shape in the very heart of what they regard as a historical Sunni patrimony, and they are drawn to ISIS's strict Salafist ideology. So this guy doesn't mind it, he's pushing for this everywhere else. This is where this Saudi power shift has come into play, but I'm not going to get into this right now. We'll talk about this later. This new guy is the one in power. He's so young. He's like 31 years old, and he kicked away Mohammed bin Naif, which is the guy that we've been working with in America. In conclusion, guys, you know what I'm gonna end on this for you guys is, you see, this is how Saudis influence the region. This is how it spreads. The terrorism that is going on around the world is some things that they are annoyed by. You know, this is something that, you know, it's a cost benefit kind of analysis for them, and they think that it benefits them. This is a cost and reputation that they're willing to handle, you know, and they're handling it. They're allowing this to happen, even though they're trying to fight some other perceived threat by Iran, or I don't know, spreading this, I don't know why, to Indonesia and America and Britain. Iran's not over there. Now, this is what they perceive, this is what they are willing to pay for, you know, this terrorism, for what they perceive is their growth of influence in the region. They haven't lifted a finger to hurt ISIS. Instead of, they have focused on Yemen and supporting anti-Bashar rebels, right? They are allied with Israel in this regard. I forgot to mention Israel in this whole thing. Israel and Saudi Arabia are allied where they see Bashar as a bigger threat than festering Islamist jihadism growing in the region. This is what's letting all these migrants come in. We're shooting ourselves in the foot here, guys. You know, unfortunately, this view from Saudi and Israel, for that matter, you know, is very dangerous for the world. We can see that this war and extremism in Africa and the Middle East has overloaded Europe with too many refugees, creating issues in many different dimensions, including lone wolf Islamic terrorism and social welfare crises, right? And internal dissent towards migrants because there's no jobs, because the EU system has failed. This is a problem, but I don't want to make this video too long. I thought this was okay to bring this into light. This has been a video by me, Arthur. Leave me a like button if you like this video. Follow me for more of these videos, and leave a comment.